And Milad, just give me the signal when it's actually time to start talking as opposed to waiting for people to gather.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. All right. So hello, everybody. My name is James Buchanan. I'm the GM of the Edge Cloud Business Unit at ADVA, and have become a bit of a, I guess, a grizzled industry vet in the NFV space. So I would like to run through this presentation. What this is a continuation, I think it's now the third or fourth one that I've done, which is called Postcards from the Edge, which is really intended just as an update on what's going on at the far edge of the NFV space. This is something that we did live at The Hague last year. Unfortunately, we have to do it this way this year, but maybe we'll get together again very soon. So what I'd like to do with this year's is pretty much the same format as last year's, to give an update on what's going on in the market, who's deploying, who's not, those sorts of things, as well as talk about some of the trends that we're seeing on the technology side of the house. This has obviously been a very strange year, but also kind of interesting from how the deployments have been going. So let's proceed. So the first thing to talk about is this: the big news. There's a cycle even bigger than COVID going on with NFV, which is that it's gone through its hype curve. And as you can see from the deployment that we've seen, the time leading up to 2018, mid-2018, was pretty dire. And then, what is that now? About 24 months ago, things started lighting up, and there'd be one after another making service providers typically making decisions to select, and then in turn going out and winning end customers of theirs. That continued on through 19. It was very exciting. And then, well, guess what? Somewhere around March of this year, things kind of ground to a halt. And they pretty much just shut down for a quarter. And it was interesting. There was still lots of interest. There were still deals on the street, but honestly, people were just saying, I can't even get into the lab to test it. So that just really slowed things down, and it sort of gave a little bit of impetus to people continuing to do what they already had operationalized, right? I can't get into the lab to test something new, but I will at least deploy something that I know already. So I think we've all seen that in various measures throughout our industry, and it's completely reasonable. Round about June, July, it flipped, and it flipped quite strongly, at least in the slice of the market that we're exposed to. And people, managed to solve their lab problem. Maybe they got some stuff delivered to the key person's basement, or however they did it, or they got a protocol wherein the necessary people were allowed to go into the lab for a certain amount of time, and things have started rolling again. So that's great. The pause has really ended, and we're seeing a significant uptick. The other thing that has happened, which is something that we predicted would come, but not this quickly, is that enterprise direct sales are now rivaling. I'd say it's pretty much neck and neck with service provider or managed service sales. So a couple extra words on that. If you think about IP services today, routers, firewalls, SD-WAN boxes that are deployed to a customer prem, globally, using broad numbers, it's about 60% buy or 60% build. So I, the enterprise, own these boxes versus about 40% buy, wherein I purchase it as a managed services, but the boxes are owned by my service provider. We have long expected the UCPE deployment model to mimic that overall trend. But it began very heavily skewed towards the service providers, in part because at this show, what was it, 7 years ago now, the UCP or the NFV industry kind of began by an edict with the white paper that was famously dropped here. So it took a little while for sort of the natural balance of the market to express itself. But we're seeing now that we're getting to that. So that's maybe the most interesting thing, is that expected rebalancing is starting take place. So what are they deploying? This is not unfamiliar if you saw this presentation last year, but the emphasis has changed. So it's still, the leading applications are SD-WAN and firewall, but the notion of a tenant app that the end customer has something else that they want to deploy into the traffic stream leaving their site is really come to the fore. And I would argue it's just about impossible now for a service provider to win a major deal from an enterprise without being able to offer this functionality. And I would say even more strongly, whether it's through a service provider or directly, that we are seeing the customer app as the must-have. It's the key thing, and then yeah, I'll take some SD-WAN with that too, or so on. So this has really changed, and like I said, it's in emphasis because tenancy was happening last year, but it's now become the essential one. Okay, so that's the what. So let's specifically drill down on the market itself. So as I said earlier, the enterprise and by extension government demand is growing. Government by its nature moves a little more slowly, but we are seeing this in a large number of environments. The geopolitical change that's underway with sort of the reemergence of regional trading blocks or balkanization, however you want to call it, is having its play because that's forcing a reevaluation of vendors anyway. I can't deploy this box from this vendor anymore, so I've got to go out and reevaluate how I do want to do it. Maybe I reevaluate the technology as well. Why are CIOs pursuing that? Well, the initial reasons, as I said, are kind of the same as for service providers to offer, that the appliances are viewed as lock-in. Maintenance schedules are murder if I've got a stack of boxes. But the main thing is the CIO, I have been buying compute in boatloads from the major compute vendors forever. I have a relationship, it's comfortable technology space for me. I would like to normalize the compute applications related to networking with what I'm doing with everything else in my world. So putting everything onto a managed compute platform, having those management tools available to me is a win. And as I said earlier, that special application that I would like to have in the data stream is also going to reside on that compute platform. So that's why the CIOs are interested. Through whom are they fulfilling? We see most major deals from, if you will, the Fortune 1000-ish type customers appearing. Well, we hear about them through multiple channels. We'll hear about them through a service provider or two or three, depending upon the size and interests of the enterprise, and also through a reseller or two. They're doing as you'd expect. The CIOs, they're shopping these deals around actively as buy versus build, and they've got a variety of options in terms of fulfillment available to them. So let's cut over to the service providers. What's happening with them? So first up, I'd say that the most significant change in the service provider market is that it's not just the leadership wave. There are now, in any given market, especially in the markets that the Fortune 1000 shop in, if you will, those markets will have typically, several service providers able to offer UCP-based services. So competition is a fact of life now for the service providers. The early adopters now have company. Good news for us, a bit more of a struggle for those early adopters. The other thing that service providers is doing is that they're pushing the use of UCPE down market. So we talked about this last year, and it's a trend that's simply continuing. The why is clear enough, right? I can stock fewer boxes if I do it all on a compute platform, even if it can't quite match on a box for box basis the price point. It can on a box versus boxes basis, so I don't have all those logistics costs. Then if I'm doing everything one way or many things one way, I can make that a focus for some of my back office integration and simplify my support models. So that's happening. And then finally, some of the applications or some of the functions that are available simply in the NFVI layer, the routing, the tunneling, et cetera, are sufficient for some of the applications. So the service providers are deploying this more broadly. They're working on internal commercial offers to make sure that for the sales teams, it's equally attractive to do UCPE versus a dedicated box, such that then these other values that I just spoke of can be realized in the market, and more importantly, upsell. And so I've now got a platform onto which I can upsell applications 2, 3, and 4. So that's happening as a major trend, I would say, in the service providers. And the good news for them is that the hardware costs are coming down. So even for multi-VNF applications, we're seeing boxes come down now in about the $300 range, or at least being announced and getting those to markets. So the ability of a UCP-based solution to be cost competitive with a dedicated box has been there for a while now at a total solution basis, but it's now getting reasonably interesting on a single application, single box basis. Okay, so that is an update, I would say, in terms of what's happening in the market at the enterprise level, at the what level, what applications are they deploying, who and how are they buying, and in turn, how are the service providers responding to the changes in the market. Let's cut over to the technology side. So I think the industry in general has used the COVID time to actually advance some of the technology topics that have been brewing in the background. So this first one is unchanged from last year, but it was the buzz last year. I think probably SASE has stolen its mantle for this year, but we see a lot of it. So there are a couple of really important things to talk about as it relates to the deployment of containers in a UCPE environment. Number one is that the commercial VNFs, the SD-WANs, the firewalls, are not available to the general market in an open containerized fashion. So you're looking at some VMs regardless. But the tenant application very frequently is an enterprise application that has been or wants to be deployed as containers. And so you really need to have this hybrid solution where at the far edge on the UCPE platform, you have the ability to run both commercial VM-based VNFs as well as enterprise containers. And so that's really, this is the state of the art, if you will, which is that you deploy a sandbox into which containers can be deployed. That is a manageable sandbox. The management models differ quite dramatically based upon the desires of the end customers and the theory of the service providers, if there's a service provider in the mix. Sooner or later, somebody is likely to be pointing a Kubernetes instance at the inside of that little microcloud to deploy their containers. So that is, I won't say done and dusted, but that is absolutely the accepted go-forward model that we're seeing in the market. SASE. So you couldn't get through a presentation without some SASE. I guess a couple of interesting things to say about this. First of all, you might look at SASE and say, what does that got to do with UCPE? It's, at a thematic level, it's about taking the functionality that exists out at the prem and sucking it back into the cloud, and so that everything's backhauled at least to the first pop and dealt with there. That's kind of true, but if that's the theme, there's some realities. Those things are sucked back over tunnel. What originates the tunnel? You need some kind of IPsec termination device to begin that. And then secondly, even though there's this interest in SASE as a deployment model, the desire for tenancy to run a customer app on-prem in the traffic stream has not gone away. So we are seeing early days. I don't want to pretend this is in deployment yet, but the SASE model, there's a slice of it, which is actually quite UCPE friendly. where the UCP acts as the tunnel origination endpoint, and applications are run out there beside. And because it's general purpose compute, general purpose software infrastructure, it can be whatever you want. So that's how we see the SASE world. It's a big market. There'll be lots of everything, but there's certainly an overlap between SASE and UCPE. Next up is hardware acceleration. So this is coming. Obviously, the technologies beyond DPDK, which is table stakes, be it QET or SRIOV, those technologies are not brand spanking new, but the lineup of the ecosystem from affordable NICs through the middleware, such as us, through the applications, SD-WAN firewall / whatever, that are all lining up around a given technology and able to work together, that's what's new. And so we are seeing that now. And we're seeing some pretty significant throughput improvements thanks to SRIOV. As you can see here, we're talking about, we're seeing in our labs, 3 to 5-fold improvements. It depends really how many legs of the service chain you run through the NIC hardware, and also what gen of PCI that it's using, as you can reach a bottleneck there. But this is great. This is taking us comfortably into multi-gigabit throughput solutions on really quite modest hardware. So SRIOV is coming. As I said, it's still a little bit patchwork in terms of whether you've got all of your vendors able to play on it. But the flip side is, as long as the hardware and the middleware and at least one VNF are playing on it, then you've got benefit, and then you can start beating up on your second VNF vendor to get caught up. So that's a technology thread that we see happening. And the last one that I want to talk about is mobile. So two interesting facets to the mobile story. So first of all, very big picture, in the public market, there is this dual forcing function. The massive proliferation of antennas is forcing the separation of the electronics from being fully integrated BBUs to saying, right, that's just a radio unit. And then I will take some of the smart electronics and move it architecturally inwards because it's cheaper, I can pool it. Correspondingly, there's a move out from the core. The latency requirements and the backhaul economics drive moving some of these things out from the core towards the POP. So there's a real focus on the mobile edge. This is not especially newsworthy, but the frothy edge of mobile UCPE or NFV rather is really at edge cloud. There are many architectures. It varies by service provider. Even within a service provider, it varies by deployment in terms of what I put where and how I deploy it. And you can see the various components get moved around in different architectures. So, but there's a strong push to co-locating that with latency sensitive transport equipment so that I can get as much of that latency budget available to the applications that are running there. So that's a thrust up there at the mobile edge. Then the flip side about 5G is that the in-building penetration is problematic. And so there's a deep need to move some of this software in building so that the enterprise is actually running some of these functions and solving the in-building signal penetration. That naturally is synergistic with what they're doing on the UCPE side, especially if you're coming at it from the service provider side. So many of our service provider customers are now running trials in this space to look at a UCPE enhanced with a mobile offering as something to offer to the market. So that's sort of the big game afoot on the mobile space. So last slide, and then I'll flip over to a question. So key thing on the market side, enterprise adoption is now rivaling, I'd say roughly neck and neck with service provider adoption. There is competition in the service provider space. You're getting multiple per region, and many advancements are coming on the technology side. So with that said, I've got a question here. How are you addressing cybersecurity challenges that come hand in hand with SASE? So I'll break those two questions in two. So how the SASE side, as I said, quite honestly, are early days. So I think honestly, SASE is at that very hypey side of the market. And so it's really around forming architectures, getting people interested, initial discussions, et cetera. If I can address the cybersecurity side, that of course is, bread and butter for all of us in the networking space. Do all the usual testing. We hire pen testers to come at us and so on. And given the fact that we're deploying as a general purpose compute platform, there's all of the stuff that comes from the compute world, in addition to the stuff that comes from the networking world. So dealing with the cybersecurity and that we're in hardened Linux and yada, yada, yada is bread and butter for us. And the SASE side, I would say, is a little bit early to give you a meaningful answer aside from some vague architectural hand waving. All right. Malad, I'll take a cue from you. That's the end of the presentation. And I think we only had the one question in the hopper. If there are more questions, glad to take them. And otherwise, I'll hand